when the maitre sneered at the man in worn-out jeans holding two little girls. No one expected what would happen next. "This is not a playground," she said, turning him away. But Daniel Carter wasn't just any single dad. He was the hidden CEO of a $200 million empire, dressed down to test something money could never buy: character. Standing nearby, Rachel Thomas, a 32-year-old civil rights attorney, had been reluctant about this blind date her best friend had arranged. One look at the scene unfolding, however, changed everything. Without knowing Daniel's wealth, Rachel stepped up to defend him. Not for status or attention, but because it was right. "You know I'm a lawyer, right?" she asked the hostess coldly. That moment sparked something in Daniel. She saw him not as a rich man, but as a father who deserved dignity. Their unexpected dinner at a family diner revealed deeper truths. Rachel noticed Daniel's kindness, the way he doted on his daughters, and something more, an inconsistency in his story. When she finally confronted him, Daniel admitted he had tested her, afraid of being used like in the past. But Rachel had already passed with flying colors. She didn't fall for his wealth. She stood by his soul, and that, Daniel realized, was the rarest kind of love. The night Daniel Carter walked into the upscale restaurant with his twin daughters, no one saw him for who he really was, dressed in faded jeans and carrying one daughter on his arm. While holding the other's hand, he looked like an exhausted single dad, not the CEO of a multi-million-dollar tech company. But that was exactly the point. Daniel had come here not to impress, but to observe. He wanted to know how the woman he was meeting, a blind date, set up by a mutual friend, would react when faced with reality, not fantasy. Across the parking lot, Rachel Thomas checked the address on her phone, already half regretting showing up. A 32-year-old black attorney who specialized in racial justice cases, she had no patience for what her friend called social experiments, especially when the man's profile said single dad with no assets, just heart. That to her sounded like emotional chaos in disguise. But as she approached the restaurant, she saw the commotion. A hostess was turning Daniel away, telling him, "This is a fine dining establishment, not a daycare." Rachel felt the heat rise in her chest. She didn't know the man, didn't know his story, but she knew discrimination when she saw it. "Is there a problem here?" she asked calmly but firmly, stepping between the hostess and the problem. "Family," the woman faltered under Rachel's gaze. "You must be his date," she said stiffly. "I was only suggesting they try somewhere more appropriate for children." "You mean somewhere black families are allowed to exist without judgment?" Rachel replied. "You know I'm a lawyer, right? And you do know what a discrimination lawsuit can cost?" Daniel watched in awe. This woman, who didn't know anything about his wealth or influence, stood up for him with fire and principle. Not because she was trying to impress anyone, not because she thought he had something to offer, but because it was right. They left the restaurant together and ended up at a cozy family diner where Rachel laughed with his daughters over chicken nuggets and crayons. There, she started to notice things. The expensive watch Daniel tried to hide beneath his sleeve. The way he dismissed a call from a high-powered law firm like it meant nothing. She wasn't just a lawyer, she was observant. "What do you do exactly?" she asked. Daniel smiled slightly. "Consulting. Nothing fancy." But later that evening, when his daughter accidentally spilled juice on her, Rachel didn't flinch. She comforted the child, cleaned up the mess, and kept laughing. That, to Daniel, said more than any rom could. She wasn't here for appearances. She was here for them. It wasn't until days later that Rachel learned who Daniel really was. And when she confronted him about the truth he'd hidden, he didn't make excuses. "I've been hurt before," he said, simply. "But you, Rachel, you've been real from the start." She could have walked away, but she stayed. Because sometimes Love doesn't begin with roses or riches. It begins when someone stands up for you, not because they have to, but because your dignity matters. And Daniel knew, without a doubt, that Rachel wasn't just someone who passed his test. She was the answer he didn't even know he was looking for. Rachel Thomas wasn't easily fooled. As a seasoned attorney who had spent her career fighting cases of racial injustice, she'd seen every type of deception. So when she sat across from Daniel Carter in a humble family diner, she couldn't help but notice the contradictions. His jeans were modest, but the watch on his wrist was far from it. An elegant timepiece, no broke consultant could casually wear. And the way he canceled a meeting with Johnson and Associates, one of the city's most prestigious law firms, with a single phone call, that wasn't just confidence. That was power. Still, Rachel didn't say anything at first. Instead, she watched. She observed the way Daniel wiped down the table for his daughters before they sat. She saw how he gently helped Sophia into her booster seat and asked Emma if she wanted nuggets or fries with a tenderness that couldn't be faked. He was present completely and wholly for his children. So when she finally asked, "You're testing me, aren't you?" and saw the flicker of guilt in his eyes, she already knew the answer. Daniel hesitated but didn't deny it. Everyone tests everyone, Rachel. The real question is, who are you when no one's watching? Rachel could have walked away right then. But instead, she leaned in. I'm the kind of person who loves from the inside out, the kind who shows up when it matters, not when it's convenient. That response shook Daniel more than he expected. Because the truth was, she had shown up. At the restaurant when the hostess humiliated him. At the diner when his daughter spilled her juice on her. At every moment when most people would have bailed, Rachel stayed. But things weren't that simple. Behind the scenes, Daniel was hiding more than just his wealth. He was protecting his daughters and himself from a world that had hurt them before. His late wife's sister, Patricia, had already tried to take the girls, accuse him of being unstable, and leak personal information to the press. That's why he recorded every public interaction and built walls around his life. It wasn't about games, it was about survival. Yet Rachel was slowly breaking through those walls, not with questions but with actions. She didn't need his money. She didn't even need answers. What she needed was the truth, and Daniel realized if she had loved him even when she thought he had nothing, then maybe, just maybe, he'd found the kind of love that could weather everything. 3 weeks after their first unexpected date, Daniel Carter found himself living in a reality he hadn't dared to hope for. For the first time in years, he felt something beyond obligation, beyond caution. He felt joy. Rachel Thomas had become more than a date. She was becoming a part of his daughters' lives. Emma clung to her hand while drawing chalk butterflies in the play park, and Sophia now called her Aunt Rachel with innocent affection. And yet, even with all that warmth, Daniel was still hiding the truth. Rachel knew something didn't add up. She saw the cracks in his story, the way he dodged questions about work, the luxurious building she once saw him walk out of, the way he handled high-stakes phone calls with effortless authority. Still, she gave him the space to reveal himself, never prying, never judging. But the truth had a way of surfacing, especially when people with malicious intentions tried to twist it. That's when Patricia, Daniel's sister-in-law, re-entered the picture. Caroline's younger sister had been a thorn in his side since his wife's death, constantly questioning his choices as a father, accusing him of being emotionally unstable, and even threatening legal action to gain custody of his daughters. Her most recent attack? Threatening to expose Daniel's secret relationship with Rachel, accusing him of manipulating an innocent woman while disgracing Caroline's memory. Daniel had had enough. He called Rachel and asked her to meet him the next morning at the 38th floor of the prejudice Westwood Corporate Center. She agreed, though confused by the location. Nothing could have prepared her for what she saw. The elevator opened to reveal a sleek executive suite. There, Daniel's daughters greeted her, warmly before a sharply dressed woman appeared, Patricia Sterling. With a venomous smile, she welcomed Rachel like a queen greets a threat. "You must be the girlfriend. Shame he didn't tell you who he really is." Then came the reveal. Daniel stepped out in a tailored suit, flanked by his legal team. "Thank you for coming, Rachel," he said calmly. Patricia mocked him, calling the relationship a social experiment, accusing him of playing with Rachel's trust. But Daniel was ready. With his lawyer David at his side, he exposed Patricia's long-standing campaign to steal custody, her attempts to manipulate the media, and the most damning of all evidence of embezzlement. Patricia had stolen over $500,000 from company accounts, using passwords she acquired through deceit. Every threat, every shady move, had been documented. As Patricia broke down in tears, forced to sign a restraining order and return the stolen funds, Rachel stood in stunned silence. Daniel turned to her, his voice soft now. "I lied about who I was. I was scared. But everything, we shared every laugh, every quiet moment. That was real. I needed to know you loved me." For me. Rachel didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked at his daughters playing in the corner safe, smiling, innocent. Then back at Daniel, no longer the man in jeans, but a protector, a father, a man who'd been hurt and still dared to hope. "You didn't just protect yourself," she finally said. "You protected everyone you love." And Daniel knew in that moment, this wasn't just a woman he had tested. This was the woman he had been waiting for his entire life. The moment Rachel Thomas stepped into the executive suite of Westwood Enterprises, her heart dropped. This wasn't just an office. It was a symbol, a towering truth that shattered everything she thought she knew about Daniel Carter. He wasn't a broke single father trying to make ends meet. He was the president and CEO of a $200 million empire, and she had been kept in the dark. The confrontation was swift and brutal. Patricia, his sister-in-law, delighted in revealing the truth. She painted Rachel as another naive woman caught in one of Daniel's tests. Someone being used to satisfy his curiosity about human nature. But Patricia didn't expect what came next. Daniel didn't run. He stood tall and calm, and with the help of his legal advisor, David, he flipped the entire narrative. He exposed Patricia's manipulation, her attempts to take custody of his daughters, her embezzlement of over $500,000 from company accounts. He revealed how she had stalked, recorded, and spread lies, all under the pretense of protecting family. Every accusation was backed by cold, hard evidence. Recordings, emails, and financial records. Rachel stood silent through it all, her mind racing. She had been tested, yes, but for good reason. Daniel hadn't been playing games. He had been protecting his daughters, his legacy, and himself from a world that had already taken too much from him. And yet, the truth still stung. After Patricia signed the restraining order and left in shame, Daniel turned to Rachel, voice trembling not from fear, but from honesty. "I lied about who I was, but I never lied about how I felt. Every moment with you was real." Rachel didn't speak for a while. She looked at Sophia and Emma, who ran to hug her like nothing had changed. And that's when she realized everything had changed. But one thing hadn't, the way they made her feel. Safe, chosen, loved. "You tested me," she finally said, "but more importantly, you trusted me with the truth. And that means more to me than any title or bank account ever could." In that moment, surrounded by walls of glass and gold, Rachel didn't see a millionaire. She saw a father. She saw a man who'd been wounded but never gave up on love. And most of all, she saw herself strong enough to stay, brave enough to believe. Because real love isn't found in perfection. It's found in truth after the lies fall away. 2 months had passed since that unforgettable night, when Daniel Carter and Rachel Thomas walked away from a fancy restaurant that had refused to seat a black father with 2 little girls. Back then, Daniel was disguised in worn jeans, hiding the truth about who he was. Rachel, unaware of his wealth, had defended him without hesitation, not for appearances, but because it was right. Now, everything had changed. Not only had Daniel revealed his true identity as the CEO of a $200 million company, but he had also made a powerful, quiet move. He purchased the very restaurant that had basically discriminated against him and transformed it from the inside out. No longer a place of quiet exclusion and polished arrogance, the restaurant now buzzed with life, warmth, and diversity. Families of all colors and classes dined side by side. The menu stayed elegant, but the atmosphere shifted entirely. The message was clear. Everyone belongs. At the grand reopening, Daniel and Rachel sat at their favorite booth. This time, not as strangers, but as partners. Rachel wore the engagement ring Daniel had given her, a symbol of something deeper than love, trust rebuilt through truth. Across from them, Sophia and Emma giggled over coloring books while the smell of fresh bread floated through the air. That's when the former hostess walked in. She looked smaller somehow, less proud, more human. Her eyes filled with guilt as she approached. "Mr. Carter," she began softly. I was wrong. I need a job. Please." Rachel looked at Daniel. The man who had been humiliated here now held the power to reject or forgive, but he simply smiled. "Everyone deserves a second chance," Rachel said before he could speak. "But in this place, we treat people like family no matter how they look or what they earn." It wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. Daniel had turned a place that once rejected his daughters into a home for families who had too often been pushed aside. And Rachel, she had become more than his partner. She was the architect of a new kind of justice, one built not on punishment, but on dignity. As Emma looked up and asked, "Daddy, is Aunt Rachel going to live with us forever?" Daniel squeezed Rachel's hand and nodded. "Forever, sweetheart. Because in the end, true wealth isn't found in buildings or bank accounts. It's found in the people who see you not for what you have, but for who you are, and choose to stay anyway. And the best way to defeat discrimination isn't to destroy the past, but to build a better future, one table at a time." From the moment Rachel Thomas stepped into Daniel Carter's life, everything changed. Not because he was looking for love, but because he had nearly given up on it. For years, Daniel had hidden behind a carefully constructed mask, one that protected his daughters, his heart, and his legacy from people who only saw his wealth. He had learned the hard way that money attracted masks and trust came at a high cost. But Rachel was different. She didn't know about his empire when she defended him at the restaurant's entrance. She saw a black man being humiliated in front of his children, and she refused to stay silent. That moment, simple and powerful, echoed through every corner of Daniel's guarded soul. It reminded him that character isn't revealed when people think you're rich. It's revealed when they think you have nothing. As their relationship grew, so did the risks. Rachel opened her heart to Daniel and his daughters without expecting anything in return. She became a natural part of their lives, helping with homework, cooking together, reading bedtime stories, and she did it all with a warmth and authenticity that no wealth could fake. But when the truth about Daniel's identity finally came out, when she learned he was the CEO of Westwood Enterprises, and that his sister-in-law Patricia had been plotting against him, Rachel had every reason to walk away. She had been lied to, even if the lie was meant to protect. And yet, instead of anger, she saw pain. She saw a man doing everything in his power to shield his daughters from betrayal. What made Rachel stay wasn't the size of Daniel's company or the elegance of his office. It was the way he knelt beside her after the truth was exposed and said, with trembling sincerity, "Every moment with you was real. I just needed to know that you were." And she was. Rachel's strength wasn't just in her ability to love Daniel. It was in her choice to forgive, to understand, to rise above the hurt and choose trust over fear. She didn't just become part of the family. She became the heart of it. 2 months later, as the renovated restaurant opened under new ownership, Rachel stood beside him, not just as a partner, but as a leader. She had been appointed the head of the new anti-discrimination policy for all of Westwood Enterprises. The very woman who was once turned away at the door was now writing the rules to ensure no one else ever would be. As families of every background filled the restaurant with laughter and warmth, Rachel looked around with quiet pride. And when the former hostess returned, humbled and asking for a second chance, it was Rachel who answered. Not with scorn, but with strength. Everyone deserves a second chance, she said. But here, we treat people like family from the moment they walk through the door. In a world that often chooses judgment over kindness, Rachel chose grace. And in doing so, she didn't just change one man's life. She changed an entire legacy. Because true power isn't found in how much you own. It's found in who you become when no one is watching. And Rachel had become the kind of woman who turned rejection into redemption and love into a revolution. In the warm glow of the newly reopened restaurant, now bustling with families of all backgrounds, laughter, and kindness, little Emma looked up from her drawing and asked the one question that made both adults pause. Daddy, is Aunt Rachel going to live with us forever? Daniel Carter smiled gently, looking at Rachel beside him, her hand resting on Sophia's shoulder as they colored together. On her finger was the engagement ring they had chosen, not for its price, but for what it symbolized: truth, trust, and transformation. Yes, Princess, Daniel replied, his voice filled with quiet certainty. Forever. That one word held so much more than a promise. It held every moment Rachel had stood by him without knowing who he really was. It carried every bedtime story she had read to the Proyan girls, every meal she had cooked without being asked, every tear she had wiped when no one else was watching. Rachel had become their home, not because of a title or a ceremony, but because she had loved them long before she knew about the millions. Now, the restaurant that once rejected Daniel for being a broke black father with kids had become a symbol of change. He had purchased it quietly and remodeled everything, except the lesson that remained, embedded in every smiling face that walked through its doors. The former hostess had returned, asking for forgiveness, desperate for a second chance. It was Rachel who answered. We believe in second chances. But from now on, every guest here is treated with dignity. No exceptions. Patricia, on the other hand, had lost everything. Her reputation, her money, and her connection to the very nieces she once tried to use. She now worked as a receptionist in a modest office, slowly learning what it felt like to be judged by appearances and not character. As Rachel looked around the restaurant, filled with warmth and light, she realized something profound. True wealth had nothing to do with bank accounts or business cards. It was found in the joy of children's laughter, the power of forgiveness, and the courage to do what's right, even when no one is watching. She leaned over and kissed Daniel on the cheek. Forever, she whispered back, because the greatest triumph wasn't the victory over prejudice. It was building a future where love, respect, and second chances could finally sit at the same table. As Rachel stood in the heart of the restaurant that once turned Daniel away, she finally understood the depth of everything they had been through. She hadn't just been tested, she had been trusted. And more than that, she had become a living answer to Daniel's greatest fear. Could someone truly love him for who he was, without knowing what he had? She had proven it, not through grand gestures or fancy words, but in quiet, consistent moments holding his daughter's hands, defending him against discrimination, and standing tall even when the truth could have pushed her away. That kind of love wasn't ordinary. It was powerful, unshakable. Now, with a ring on her finger and 2 little girls calling her Aunt Rachel, She wasn't just part of Daniel's story. She was the reason it had a new beginning. True love doesn't come when everything is perfect. It comes when someone sees you at your most vulnerable and chooses to stay. Rachel didn't fall in love with Daniel's title. She fell in love with his truth. And in doing so, she reminded us that the greatest relationships are built not on wealth or status, but on courage, honesty, and heart. True love isn't something you can buy, test, or manipulate. It's not found in luxury cars, corner offices, or carefully crafted social experiments. It's found in the quiet, unfiltered moments when someone stands by your side simply because they believe in your worth, not your wealth. Daniel learned this through pain, loss, and betrayal. But when Rachel walked into his life, everything changed. She didn't see a millionaire, she saw a father. She didn't care about his power, she cared about his daughters. And when the truth came out, she chose not pride, punishment, but love. That's what makes their story so powerful. Because the greatest victory over prejudice and judgment isn't revenge. It's not humiliation or proving someone wrong. It's building something better. Something that heals instead of hurts. A family, a community, a future where everyone is seen for who they truly are. Rachel and Daniel didn't just overcome discrimination. They rewrote the rules with kindness, courage, and truth. And in a world that still too often judges by appearance, their love reminds us the most powerful response to hate is to build a world where love always has the final word. If this story touched you, leave a comment below. Have you ever been judged by your appearance, but someone saw your true self? Let us know your story. We read everyone. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more stories that prove love and justice always find a way.